Okay, grade 8. Here's your reach back for Thursday, May the 4th be with you. Follow along. If you want to press pause and try the video or try the questions yourself, just press pause, see how well you do with the answer. So the first question is a probability question. It says, what's the probability of odd on the first spinner, heads on the second, and odd on the third? Well, the probability of odd as a fraction is 2 chances out of 3 for the first spinner. Heads would be 1 chance out of 2, and odd would be 3 chances out of 5. And in grade 8, we learned the product of those three is the answer. Now, what I'm going to do here, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to show you a trick. Since we know that we can cross-reduce products, 2 over 2 can cross-reduce, and I can even cross-reduce this 3 over 3. I can go crossways across a fraction that's there, and when I do so, I get 1/5. Now, if I don't cross-reduce, oh, hello. Oh, well, there we are. If I don't cross-reduce, oh, hello. I would get 2 times 1 times 3 over 3 times 2 times 5, which would be 6 over 30. But when I reduce 6 over 30, both are divisible by a factor of 6, leave me still with 1/5. Meaning, what is the probability? Since 1/5 is a fraction, I can convert that to a percentage. I can do it either mentally, because I know it's 20%, or I can say 1/5 is equal to how many hundredths? Since I multiply that by 20, I can multiply that by 20. I get 20 hundredths equivalent to 1/5, which still means it's 20% probability that will happen. 80% of the time you will not get an odd heads odd. Question 2 is a surface area volume question. So for surface area, the first thing I'm going to do is draw my net. You don't have to, but usually it's easier. You could also use a formula. Remember, the formula for surface area would be 2 circles and uh, a wonky rectangle, which we already described as being pi dh, because it's this length here is really the circumference of the circle, and this length here is really the height of the cylinder. So we can use pi dh. But what I'll do here is I'll just figure out pi r squared. So this is pi r squared. We said use pi as 3. So it's 3 multiplied by the radius, which is 5. Don't forget, some of you still make a mistake of doing 3 times 5 first instead of doing 5 squared. You have to do your exponents first according to order of operations, giving you 75. So this circle has an area of 75 square meters, and so too with the top of it. It would also be 75 square meters. And now all I have to do is figure out the area of the square. Now remember, what I said before is this, if I was to flip that circle down, this length of this rectangle would really be the circumference of the circle. And this measurement right here would really be the height of the cylinder. So since circumference is calculated with pi d, I could just simply use the formula pi dh. 3 multiplied by the diameter, which is 10, multiplied by the height, which is 10, and that will give me 300. So the surface area of this whole cylinder is the sum, or add together, of 375 and 75, which gives us a surface area of 450 square meters. Make sure you use the proper units for area. It's square units, because you want to differentiate or tell the difference between surface area and volume, which is your next question. For volume, we learned the volume of any of the right prisms that we studied is the same formula for all of them. It's the area of the base times the height of the prism. And in this case, the area of the base is a circle, so we're going to use pi r squared multiplied by the height of the prism. So 3 multiplied by the radius, which we already said was 5 squared. We already figured out that the area of the base is 75 multiplied by the height, which is 10. The volume would be 750 cubic meters. Okay, and it's important that you use cubic meters for volume, because we want to know how much space the inside of that cylinder takes up. Those are cubic units. Question 3 is your algebra question. If you look at this question, the first thing you probably want to identify is what is the constant. In this question, the constant is a -5. So by adding 5 to both sides, we can eliminate the constant, slowly working our way to isolating the variable. The sum of these two would be a +3. And what we want to think of is what does x divided by negative 2. The opposite of dividing by negative 2 is to multiply. So when I multiply both sides by negative 2, I isolate x, and its value is a negative 6. Not a positive 6, but a negative 6. Question 4 is our linear relations. It gives you a table, and it asks you when x's value is 200, what would the corresponding y value be? And we learned for this one, we can figure out our equation by actually figuring out the difference here. In this case, it's negative 6, and here it's positive 2. And our coefficient of our equation that shows the relationship between x and y will be the difference in y divided by the difference of x, which is negative 3. And that negative 3 goes up here. Now there's two ways to find your constant. The first way is to substitute. But if the value of x is given as 0, this is an interesting trick. Your y value will always be your constant. And in grade 10, you're going to learn that it's also what they call the y-intercept. And what that means is if I was to graph this particular one, here's my x-axis, my y. If I was to graph this, that y value of negative 10 would be where that line crosses the y-axis. But you don't learn that until grade 10, so it's not important. But negative 10 is actually your constant. So once I have my equation, I could substitute 200, which is my x value, into my equation and simplify it. So negative 600 minus 10 equals y. And negative 600 take away 10 is negative 610. So your corresponding y value would be negative 610. How many are perfect so far? Excellent. How many are close to perfect so far? How many have nothing right so far? Anybody? Excellent. We all have some moderate success with this. Okay. The next question is a fairly easy multiplication of fractions. Did anyone not convert the mixed fraction to an improper fraction? Did anyone not convert that? Did anyone try and do it? Did anyone use the area model? Anyone silly enough to try that one? Well, so most of you did this. 7 quarters multiplied by 5/8. Can anyone tell me what they think the most common mistake is that people make that's not really a mistake but is more work than they need to do? Common denominator. It's still going to work, right? You're still going to get the right answer if you use a common denominator. But because you're multiplying fractions, you don't need to. Multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. You get 35 over 32, which is 1 and 3/32. Now, does anyone remember how we did this question using the area model? Vaguely? Is it somewhere in your brain there? If I put 5/8 over here, and I put 1 and 3/4 over here, you kind of remember this now? Okay. So the area of this square here would be what number? No. What's the product of those two? What's 5/8 times 1? 5/8, right? So 5/8 multiplied by 1. The area of this square, I'll use a different color marker, would be 5/8. What would the area of this square be? It would be the product of 5/8 times 3/4, right? Which is 15/32. Do you agree with that? So the product of 1 and 3/4 by 5/8 will actually be this number plus this number. So if I was to add these together, what common denominator will I use? Between 8 and 32. 32. What would my numerator be if I add those together? 35 over 32, which would ultimately give me the exact same answer. Does anyone totally, completely not remember doing area models for multiplication fractions? Nobody completely forgets? You do? Yeah, a little bit? Okay. All right. Just so you know. What's the category for question 6? If you had to define the category, what would you say? Ratios and rates. This is a question involving rates, right? The rate of, or the cost rate for pens is $1.20 for 5. So if I was to set that up as a proportion, I could say it's $1.20 for 5 pens. How much is it for 7? Right? That's one way to do it. How many did it this way? Did anyone do it using proportional reasoning? How many found the unit rate and then multiplied it by 7? The rest of you, everyone. Okay. I'm going to do it this way first, and then we'll do the unit rate. So algebraically, we know that we can multiply across this way to create one side of an algebraic equation to solve proportional reasoning. The other way, 7 times $1.20 would be $8.40. Divide both sides by 5. And the cost of 7 pens would be whatever $8.40 divided by 5 is. So $8.40. Oh, hello. Clear, clear, clear. Still worked up over that dividing by 0. $8.40 divided by 5. Oh, divided by 5 is $1.68, which is your answer. Okay? But if you wanted to calculate unit rate, you could simply say $1.20 divided by 5 means that each pen costs 24 cents. And if you multiply that by 7, you still get the same answer of $1.68 for the 7 pens. So not one person used proportional reasoning? Nobody? Oh, what a shame. What a shame. I think everybody had this question right. So they realized that they don't do -6 takeaway first, so they keep that as the first part. The product of these two is positive 12. And positive 12 divided by -2 is -6. They then realize that -6 take away -6 is the same thing as -6 plus a positive 6. Either way you do it, you end up with an answer of 0. Did you get that? Okay, so you got a positive 12 or negative positive 12? Yeah, that was lucky. That was lucky. This is the hardest question on the test, I think. In order to solve this one, you had to realize that the diagonal, which is right here, of that, which is 10 meters, is really the hypotenuse of a right triangle. And since Pythagoras said the area of that square equals the area of the two squares attached to the legs, this area is 100, which means that each of these squares has to have an area of 50, right? Since we know the area of 49 would have given you a 7-side length, the area of 50 would be the square root of 50, which is approximately 7.1 meters. Okay? 7.1 meters each. So if I go back over here and put 7.1 and 7.1 and 7.1 and 7.1, the perimeter would be 28.4 meters. Now if you had 28, that's still right because you just really rounded to 7. It's not wrong. And if you had 28 points, what's the actual square root of 50? 28. Yeah, so you could have had 28.28 if you used 2 decimal places from the calculator, right? This symbol here is at the approximate perimeter, so all of those would be valid. And the final question is 21% of 80. How many of you use mental math? Not one person. Colin, you use mental math. Travis, you use mental math? No. Who used a calculator? Okay. So if you use mental math, I'm going to do the mental math. 10% is $8.40. So 20% would be $16.80. 1%, I'd move the decimal 2 places over, would be 84 cents. Add those together to get 21%, would be $17.64, right? But if you simply use the calculator, 21% is 21 hundredths, which is 21 hundredths of $84. A calculator would tell you that 21% of $84 is $17.64. Okay? All right, now be honest, don't lie to me. Who got 9 out of 9? Who got close to 9 out of 9? Who got so poor they don't even want to share their answer? Nobody. Excellent. That's good news. Okay, good job.